I asked him, can I move around? I would really like to hop up on all fours like a cow. I would estimate within the first 3 minutes, she stops crying. Her chest starts collapsing. And let me tell you, this was way worse than giving birth to little Anna. Oh my gosh. This is something I need to work through and process. Welcome back to my channel, guys. If you are new here, my name is Marissa. I am a mum of now 6 beautiful children, and today I wanted to share my premature birth and labor story. So first up, I am not in a hospital. I feel like this is a very hospital-y background. It's not. I am staying with my mum at the moment, hence the weird background, but welcome here. I have a very dramatic, traumatic story to share, and the reason why I wanted to share is because premature birth is not something that I really took an interest to. I've never taken time to learn more about it, and so I naively assumed that all my pregnancies would be fine, as they always have been. As you can imagine, having a premature baby for my 6th baby after having 5 perfectly normal, no complications or natural pregnancies and births, it was really difficult for me, and it was not something that I ever thought would ever happen to me. Sorry, I have 2 cats in the room who are like literally scratching my legs if I seem distracted. Okay, so I will let you guys know that I did make a first trimester recap video, which I will link up here, because I did go into detail about the complications I was experiencing in early pregnancy, what that looked like, and I go into detail there. I'm not going to go into detail now, but I will link it up here for you guys to go and watch if you want to. Basically, in a nutshell, I found out I was pregnant really early on, within like 2 to 4 weeks of conception. Everything was great, but then when I hit 9 weeks pregnant, I woke up in a pool of blood. I went to my GP to check if I was still pregnant, to which they did confirm I was still pregnant, because my HG levels, which they determined through a blood test, they were still there, which meant that I had not miscarried the baby, but I was bleeding, and so they wanted to monitor me. Basically, I continued bleeding throughout the entire pregnancy up until I gave birth. They did eventually find out I had a large hematoma on my cervix, which is where they assumed the blood was coming from. To this day, I still do not believe that is where the blood came from, but again, irrelevant. So let's pretend you guys have already watched that first trimester update video. Now let's skip to 22 weeks pregnant. So at this point, I had my 20-week scan where they measured baby, everything was fine, everything was normal. At 22 weeks, I woke up in a larger pool of blood. So I did check myself into the hospital. They tested my waters, and sure enough, they said that my membranes had ruptured, and basically that means that my waters have broken. They told me you could potentially go into labor within the next 48 hours. If you do, we cannot save your baby because it is too early. So that was a very emotional time. Thank the Lord, I did not go into labor. Everything was fine, and after 48 hours, they checked me again, and somehow the test came back negative. They explained to me that sometimes when there is a leak, it can close back up, and so that is what they assumed happened, and so they could confidently discharge me from hospital. Now, a few weeks later, I woke up in another pool of blood, but this time it was very watery. So for this entire time during my pregnancy, I was bleeding quite heavily, especially from like 16 weeks onwards, and it was like a period kind of blood. It was bright red, it was quite heavy, and when I hit the 20-week mark, it got really, really heavy. But it was never watery. It was like that thick kind of blood. And so at 24 weeks, I woke up and not only felt like I had weed myself, but it looked like I had weed myself with a tinge of red in it, because obviously I was bleeding. So I did go and check myself back into the hospital. They tested my waters and they said that everything was fine. They did another speculum, which is basically like a pap smear but for pregnant people. So they will stick that thing inside of you, they will open you up to see your cervix, and sure enough, my cervix was not open, everything was closed. From the ultrasounds, my cervix was quite long as well, which meant that I wasn't going into labor. So again, they sent me home, but said that they wanted to do regular scans fortnightly, as well as regular midwife appointments, which is what we did. Every 2 weeks I would go and see my midwife and I would get a scan done. Baby was still growing every time I went to get a scan. Her fluid levels were fine. Everything was normal. However, she was measuring in the 13th to 15th percentile for her body parts, except for her tummy. Her tummy was in about like the 30 to 50th percentile. It would change as the weeks went on, but basically she had a fat tummy and everything else was super tiny. For me, my babies always measure from the 98th to the 99th percentile when it comes to their scans. I have quite big babies, even though I am very small, and so I should have known based on that there was something wrong. And this is something that I've done a lot of reflection on, and I did know something was wrong, but because the doctors kept saying everything is fine, she's still growing, like her fluid is still normal, I knew deep down that this pregnancy was different. There was something different about her, because it was not the same for me. While her levels of growth and fluid were normal to them based on the general population and consensus, it was not normal for any of my babies. If you are having your first baby or your second or even maybe your third, you kind of got to take what I'm saying with a grain of salt. But you got to remember, I've already had 5 babies very close in age. I have a good set of data to go off with what's normal for me and what's normal for my babies and what is not. So I wish at that point I had pushed further to really get them to triple check and double check and potentially even run different tests. I don't know if there is anything different they could have done, but I just know that after the baby was born, I had a lot of guilt associated with that, because I did know something was wrong, but I wasn't confident in what I was saying, so I never spoke up. My camera battery died. Let's skip to 29 weeks pregnant. So it is a Monday. I take all the kids to a normal 2-weekly checkup that I go to. I have a normal antenatal appointment, and then right at the end she asked me, my midwife that is, if I was still bleeding, to which I said yes I am, because I've been bleeding the whole time. She says I have to do my due diligence. It might be normal for you in this pregnancy, but for me as a midwife, it is not normal that you are bleeding, so I have to go get you a doctor to check that you are fine. So they do exactly that. I take all the kids into a different room. They swab inside me to test if my blood has any amniotic fluid in it, to which it comes back a strong yes. Now, by this time, I have been in hospital with my 4 children, 5 and under, for 3-4 hours. My 2-year-old is screaming his head off on the floor, having a tantrum. The other kids are running around the room going nuts, but they link me up to an IV drip. They start giving me antibiotics because my waters have definitely broken at this point. And then they start arranging a flight transfer to get me to the nearest hospital, which has a NICU, so they're able to look after my baby if I do go into labor. So I'm freaking out. I had no idea this was going to happen. A few hours ago, I was just taking the kids to a typical antenatal appointment, and now I am being told that I am flying away to who even knows where, because I'm about to give birth to my 29-week-old baby. My husband is at work. We have no idea what is going on. It was very, very stressful. Anyways, Alex ended up coming home from work. He came into the hospital, picked up the kids. They told me that they were flying me to the Sunshine Coast hospital there to take better care of me because Gladstone does not have the facilities to take care of a NICU baby. So Alex is stressing out because everything is happening so quickly. He takes the kids home, he packs me a bag. As I'm waiting in hospital for the plane to arrive to get me, they start jabbing me and they're trying to get a drip inside me to feed me antibiotics and do all the blood tests. Now, I kid you not, I will insert photos of here of my arms weeks later, not even 1 week, weeks later, of all the bruises and the pricks that were on my arms because it took them 11 goes to get a drip inside my arm. 11. It was so painful. It was just a horrible experience there, and if you ever go through something like this, just know that you can tell them, I do not want anyone trying to prick me anymore. If they just cannot get it, just tell them to stop and they can just figure out a different way to do what they need to do, because it was really painful. I have never cared about getting needles, and now I do. I have a bit of a fear around that. They finally get it in. They get an ambulance to take me to the airport. I hop onto the Royal Doctors, I think that's what they called. They fly me to the Sunshine Coast and I arrive at that hospital at around midnight on Tuesday. I get to the Sunshine Coast. They ask me all of the questions that the Gladstone Hospital asked me. I explain the whole bleeding situation, my waters have broken. They pretty much just put me on bed rest and expect me to go into labor within the next 48 hours. I stayed in hospital. My mum came to visit me that day. She's so lovely. As soon as she found out I was staying at the Sunshine Coast Hospital, she took leave from work, booked a hotel just across the road from me, and so she stayed with me for those 2 days. Tuesday goes by, nothing happens. I'm just sitting in bed eating and watching movies. Alex drove down to see me on a Thursday. So I was in hospital all Tuesday and all Wednesday, and then Thursday morning I did get discharged. At this point it had been 48 hours and I had not gone into labor. There was no sign of labor. So as he was driving, I spoke to the doctors and asked, can I possibly drive myself to the Gold Coast? That's where my kids are going. I have no family here, no help. If I did go into labor, it would be really, really difficult for me to be here with the baby because my kids will be on the Gold Coast and my husband will be 5 hours away. Like, it was just not an ideal situation. Thankfully, the timing was great. They said, listen, you're not going into labor. From what we can tell, we are more than happy to discharge you. Just please go down to the Gold Coast, get there as soon as possible, just in case things do happen. So Alex arrives, I tell him the great news, I can leave hospital, and I did actually book a room for us at the same hotel as my mum. So we had a little night at the hotel as a family. It was lovely. And then the following day we drove down to the Gold Coast to Alex's family's house. We settle into my mother-in-law's place, and then at lunchtime Alex and I go to the hospital just to let them know, hey, I'm down here, I will be giving birth to my baby down here. They did do another speculum, checked my cervix, nothing was happening, everything was good. So I went back home to my mother-in-law's and spent another night there. This is Friday and my husband is the only one who earns income for our family, so he did have to go back to work that following Monday. He only drove down to the Gold Coast to give the kids to our parents to look after while I was in hospital and sorting all of this bleeding and waters thing out. So I booked him a flight to fly back home the next day on Saturday, which he does. We spent the morning at my mother-in-law's as a family, and then I drove the kids to my mum's house and Alex flew back to Gladstone. That night I actually start getting pretty frequent cramps, which is so funny because Alex just left, and before that there were no signs of labor. It wasn't consistent with the timing. They weren't extremely painful, but they were uncomfortable, and this is where I'm thinking, maybe labor is coming on soon. I tell Alex that night, hey babe, I'm getting cramps every 2 to 3 minutes. They're lasting about a minute. It's getting pretty uncomfortable, but I don't want to go to the hospital because Usually this happens and then it stops. So he's telling me you should probably go get checked, babe, but I'm like, no, I think it's going to stop. Sure enough, I wake up the next morning. Clearly the cramps ended up stopping. That morning I organized to go and pick up a pram. We went to a new playground on the Broadwater and had so much fun. It was really fun. We stayed there from about 11:30 to 2 o'clock. Around 1 o'clock I start getting these cramps again. They are pretty sporadic. I probably get 1 to 3 within 20 minutes. You know, I'm breathing through them. They are not that bad. By around 2:30 to 3 o'clock when we were about to leave, they were pretty consistent. They were pretty painful. Like, I had to stretch myself out and breathe through each one. And everyone's asking me, Marissa, are you in labor? And I'm there like, I don't know, like maybe. Thank the Lord, driving home I actually did not get any cramps at all. If you've had a baby, you know sometimes when you move the cramps stop. That's what they say is Braxton Hicks, but I don't know. I don't think they're Braxton Hicks. Anyways, I go home. They're still sporadic, but later on that night from around 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. they were consistent. They were coming every 10 minutes on the dot. They were pretty painful but not too bad, and so by 9 o'clock I'm thinking I should probably call the hospital and ask if they want me to come in just to get checked again. That night I could feel baby dropping. My tummy felt really tight, and I did ask my mum if she thought it looked like baby had dropped, and she said yes. I will insert 2 comparison photos here because I tried to take photos to compare them. The contractions kept coming every 2 to 3 minutes and it happened for hours. So at 9 p.m. I decided to call an ambulance, tell them the situation. And here is the really funny thing. So this is kind of like where the drama starts, guys. So get ready. It's been pretty boring up to this point, but I promise things get dramatic. So I call the ambulance, and I live on the Gold Coast. They say, do not try driving to the hospital, we will send an ambulance there. I'm staying at my mom's house. She lives 20 minutes from the hospital. They send an ambulance coming from Rabina, which is like 35-40 minutes from where I'm staying at. So again, I could have gotten to the hospital in half the time. I understand they didn't want me to go in labor, but I'm like, my labors always take so long. After like 14 minutes, the ambulance finally arrives. They are telling me, don't move, they're gonna come inside, but my kids are sleeping near the front door. I'm sorry, but I'm just going to walk outside. The ambulance lady was like telling me to lie down and get ready to give birth and stuff just in case it happens, but I was just like, yeah. Meanwhile, I'm like running around the house just packing up my stuff because I'm like, I'm not in labor right now. I walk out to the ambulance on the road. They're laughing because it always happens when I give birth. I just walk into the hospital and I'm like, I'm in pretty deep labor, but I'm pretty calm through the whole thing. It's just how I labor. I get to the Gold Coast. I tell them I am laboring. Like, the contractions have been coming for hours now. They are about 2 to 3 minutes apart, but in the ambulance they did slow down. I think I got 2 in the 30-minute drive there. They're like, look, you're probably not going to go into labor like within the next few hours, but we think it is coming. Here's a problem. We have no NICU beds for you. So not only do they send an ambulance 40 minutes away to my house, they then take me to a hospital that cannot cater to my situation. So I'm very confused at this point. Why did you bring me here? Why not drive me to a hospital that has beds? Anyways, they do all the checks on me. My cervix is still not dilated. They call around and eventually they do book me a spot at the Royal Brisbane Women's Hospital, which is about an hour away, an hour and a little bit away from the Gold Coast Hospital. They chuck me in the ambulance again and drive me up. Thankfully, my mother-in-law did rock up to the hospital on the Gold Coast because she didn't want me to be alone. My husband is like 7 hours away. My kids are at home with my mum. She's watching them, so she came to the hospital to look after me and kind of be my spokesperson just in case I did go into labor and I couldn't speak up for myself. So when they transferred me in the ambulance, it was around midnight. She drove up behind us and then they checked me into the Royal Brisbane Hospital. I have to re-explain my situation again there, and then They pretty much leave me in the room until 6 a.m. and I'm just chatting to my mother-in-law. When I arrived at the Royal Brisbane's hospital, my contractions had slowed down to about 1 every 10 minutes, but they were coming every 10 minutes. Like, it had not stopped for hours at this point. About 11 hours of contractions non-stop, but like I said, I did start contracting earlier the previous day at around lunchtime. The whole time they are still taking blood from me, they re-jabbing me in different spots, they're doing speculars, they're checking my cervix. At this point, it is a week later from when I went to my antenatal appointment where they discovered my waters had indeed broken. They basically say to me, from the looks of things, your waters did break at 22 weeks. They did not know why. The doctors sent me home and said that I was fine because the Brisbane hospital is a lot more experienced than the hospital up in where I'm from. And they basically said that when a test comes back positive, it is pretty much never wrong. But if it comes back negative, it's kind of like a pregnancy test. If it comes back negative, that can be wrong. They never double checked me if I wasn't negative, which they probably should have, because once the baby was born, we discovered that her lungs were that of a 22-week-old, even though she was born at 30 weeks. So her lungs pretty much stopped growing at the point where I went to hospital and said my waters have broken. They stopped growing at that point because there was not enough fluid encasing her to help mature her lungs. Back to the present time, I have been in the hospital by myself. My mother-in-law did leave at around 6 a.m. Told her to go home and get some rest because things weren't really progressing. At around lunchtime, I was talking to Alex, and funnily enough, he couldn't actually work that day, which is a really big blessing. So at around lunchtime, I was still contracting, and he's like, I feel like I should drive down. I told him not to, but he was just like, I feel like I should drive down. So he started driving down at around 1:30, 2 o'clock, which ended up being a very good thing. At this point, I was really tired because I had been contracting for over 24 hours. I was also getting observations every 3 hours, so regardless, I was being woken up every 3 hours to get my bloods done, to check my temperature for infection and all of that. They also kept doing speculums on me, but eventually the doctor did say if I wanted to stop getting them done, then they would stop, because the irritation of the cervix could make the labor happen faster. And at this point, their biggest goal was keeping that baby inside of me as long as possible. Something I forgot to mention is a week ago in Gladstone, when they found out that my waters had broken, they did offer me a steroid injection which would help the baby's lungs mature. They did actually offer this when I was 20 weeks pregnant, and they thought my waters had broken, but after prayerful consideration and a little bit of research, my husband and I decided to not get the steroids at either of those points because of the lack of long-term evidence of the side effects and what it could do to the baby. From my own research of what I discovered, if you got a steroid shot and the baby wasn't actually born preterm, it did have neurological disorders associated with that, a lot of emotional and mental stress, because the unborn baby essentially got 2 loads of cortisol, 2 loads of stress placed within its brain instead of just 1. An unborn baby at around 36 weeks, I believe, they get this load of a stress hormone that hits their body, which helps their lungs mature because they are about to be born soon. That happens naturally at around 36 weeks. So when doctors find out that you are likely to have a preterm baby, they will offer the steroid injection to help mature the baby's lungs quicker, because if baby is born before 36 weeks, their lungs are very immature and they struggle with breathing. We decided against it because I was only bleeding, and for me, there was no other signs that I was going to go into labor. At 29 weeks, I also decided to not get the injection because, again, I wasn't sure if I was going to give birth soon. At first, I did deny the steroid injections at the Brisbane hospital, and basically every hospital I went to, they would get doctors, multiple doctors, to explain the risks and why they wanted me to get the steroid shot. And it wasn't until the 18th of September that I decided to get the steroid shot. So I did say, okay, pretty certain the baby's going to be born soon. They gave me 1 shot of steroids, and then I continued contracting throughout the day. Now, I can't remember at what time all of this happened, but eventually they did hook up a CTG monitor onto me. So what a CTG does is it monitors your baby's heart rate, and then it also monitors your contractions. Funnily enough, the CTG system, whatever it's called, it never picked up on my contractions at all at any point throughout my labor. However, it did monitor the baby's heart rate pretty well. Now, because of that, as I was contracting throughout that day on the Monday, I feel like a lot of the midwives and nurses didn't believe that I was in labor. There did come a point, I would say probably at around 3 p.m, where I was pretty confident I was in labor. I was telling them that the contractions were coming pretty frequently. I would have to stop and breathe through them to handle the contraction. But I'm not saying that the nurses thought I was lying, but I also don't think that they truly believed I was in labor. One, because I was pretty chill through the whole thing, but two, the monitor just was not picking up if I had a contraction. And so they were kind of explaining to me like, oh, sometimes Braxton Hicks can do this. But I'm there like, no, like I've had babies. This is a bit more than Braxton Hicks. This isn't just me being dramatic. But then I was also doubting myself, like, am I being dramatic? Like, I'm really sooky about the needles now. Maybe this whole experience has made me just really bad with pain because I'm overwhelmed. In the end, turns out I wasn't being dramatic. I was actually in labor, and I just kept contracting. Every 10 minutes I would get 1 to 2 contractions that would last about 30 to 45 seconds. This happened from 3 p.m. all the way down to like 8 p.m. This whole time I'm just in bed contracting. Doctors are coming in and out, midwives are doing tests on me, they're checking antibiotics. Alex is still driving down from Gladstone. At around 8 p.m. he arrives, which is really great because I actually ended up giving birth to our daughter at 10:30 p.m. So he arrives, and at this point I am pretty tired. The contractions were not intense, but for whatever reason at around 8 p.m. I felt like I was transitioning. I could feel baby moving down, or at least she was trying to move down, but because I was lying on my back in the bed, things just weren't progressing. Like it was taking a long time. Not only that, but because I was only 30 weeks pregnant, the contractions were not as strong as I am used to them being. So it was like I kind of knew that she was going to be born soon, but I was also a bit confused because I'm like, this really isn't that painful. It was still painful, but more in like a stabbing way, not in a pressure way. And if you've given birth, you know that a lot of the time, like, you can feel the baby moving down and it's a lot of pressure and your tummy gets really hard. But when I would get a contraction and the midwives were touching my tummy to feel the contraction, they couldn't feel anything. But I was literally in transition at that point. Like, the baby was going to be born pretty soon. I was also explaining that the contraction was happening very low in my tummy. It was not happening around my entire stomach. It was just down low where the baby was trying to descend to. Picture me, I am lying in a hospital bed. I have the CTG hooked up to me. I also have drips inside of my, I think it was my elbow. I am stuck on a bed and I am contracting, a little bit confused whether the baby is coming out soon or not. So as I am lying in bed, I am trying to explain to them, I can feel baby trying to move down. She is trying to descend, but she can't really because of the position I am in. So I asked them, can I move around? I would really like to hop up on all fours like a cow and labor like that because it takes pressure off my back. When you're lying on your back, that's where all the pressure is going. They're saying, yeah, that's fine. After we write all our notes, you can do that. They write all their notes, and as the contraction is coming on, I am trying to get into fetal position because that is how I usually labor. It's the most comfortable. Here's the problem. Every time I moved away from lying on my back, anytime I moved to the side, when I tried to hop up on all fours on the bed, baby's heart rate would drop dramatically, or the positioning of the cords would just come off completely, and the midwives and nurses started stressing out. That made me stress out because I cannot be in the position that I want to be. So I am lying there pretty upset and overwhelmed. I'm not voicing this to anyone because I understand what they're trying to do. They want the baby to be safe. That's the #1 priority, which I accepted because, you know, I care more about the health of my baby than I do about me enduring pain. But it was really overwhelming because I felt like I was not in control. I could not labor the way I wanted to. It was just really upsetting, and I didn't cry. At least at this point I was not crying, but I was getting really frustrated with not being able to move and having to stay on my back pretty much. Like, it was just getting really frustrated that I felt like I was the last person in control of the whole situation. Now, here's the thing that tipped it all off. There was this one specific nurse. Everyone is scrambling around, writing down their notes, trying to get everything in place, getting ready for the baby to be born. And I understand that. But there was this one nurse, she was like, can you stop moving because I need to hear the baby's heart rate? And I completely understand that. And I said yes, but that was the thing that set me off. Like, it was one thing for me to assume that I needed to stay in that position because I kind of did, and I got that. But no one had actually told me, Marissa, you actually need to stay there, up until that point. Now, when she did tell me, I feel like that was the final straw of me realizing I am the last person who gets to stay in this situation. And so I'm overtired. I got pretty pissed at that, but I'm lying there contracting. When she left the room and my normal midwife came in, she asked how I was going, and I just broke down in tears and started sobbing. She was basically like, are you okay? Are you stressed because of the baby? Are you worried because Alex isn't here yet? And I just said, no, I am so frustrated that I'm the last person. Like, I'm so uncomfortable right now. I'm gonna cry. Oh my gosh, this is something I need to work through and process. Yeah, I pretty much said, like, I just feel really uncomfortable right now. Like, I'm not used to being told how to be during labor. Like, I feel really claustrophobic and I feel really controlled right now, which I hate. And she was just like, I understand. And I said, every time I move, the baby's heart rate drops. And she goes, I understand, but can you understand, like, we really need to keep baby's heart rate up? And so of course I'm like, of course I get that, it's just really hard. And she was really lovely. And that was when Alex got there. Hallelujah. So Alex arrived, and he was pretty stressed, as you can imagine, because the baby is about to be born. A few hours before she was born, they did come in with the second round of steroids, and I am meant to take that, I think, 24 hours after the first one. But because they knew baby was going to be born so soon, they decided to give it to me earlier, just to help her that little bit more, which they did. I also forgot to mention that they did give me the shot that tries to stop labor, but it didn't work. I did go into labor spontaneously. They did everything they could to slow it down. They did everything they could to mature baby's lungs, and I'm really happy that we did take the steroid shot at the time we did. I don't know how it would have gone if we did it earlier, but I am really happy that we decided to make that decision. At around 9 o'clock, I had a whole bunch of doctors there. I think there was like 2 or 3 male doctors, there was a few nurses, and then I had like 2 or 3 midwives in the room as well. I am breathing through them, and I start feeling the baby descend. Now, it's getting pretty painful at this point, and I can feel baby trying to move down into my pelvis, and then it would stop. And each contraction, she was trying to move down, but I could feel the position I was in. I was basically bent like this on the bed because the bed was on an angle. So I am here, and as you can imagine, my pelvis is like kind of tucked under, and I'm telling them the baby's trying to descend, but she can't move. At the peak of the contraction, as she was trying to squeeze down into my pelvis, her heart rate would drop dramatically, and you can hear it on the CTG. So everyone's in the room, she's trying to descend, I'm in pain lying on the bed, and you just hear her heart rate go beep, 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 beep. Like, it would it would drop significantly fast at the peak of the contraction, which is really scary when you're in the most pain and you're hearing that heart rate drop. But over time, because this was happening for a long time, at least an hour, I realized that her heart rate was dropping at the peak of the contraction because she was squished. She was trying to move down the canal to get closer to being born, but she couldn't because I was on my bloody back. And this is what I wish I did. I don't know if I ever would do it in the actual situation, but I do wish that at that point, when I was confident that the baby was fine, the heart rate was fine, it was only dropping at the peak of the contraction, I wish at that point that I pulled those bloody cords off monitoring us and I just squatted and got her out. I truly believe that she would have been born faster and therefore would have been in less stress if I was able to get into position properly and open up my pelvis for her to get down. I did end up giving birth to her on my back. When she moved down into my pelvis, because it was quite cramped because of the position I was in, the doctors were like telling me, you need to start pushing. And I have never had that. I actually explained to the midwives beforehand, I have never actually had to push. My body has always ejected the baby by itself. Just warning you guys that I don't know how to push. Because she was only 30 weeks, the hormones in my body were not prepared to eject her. So like I was saying earlier, my contractions were not very strong. And then especially when it came to pushing, I did not get any urge to push. I was lying in bed and the doctors were telling me you need to start pushing. And so I'm lying there on my back. My legs are in those things that you see in movies. I don't know what they're called, but they were sitting in those things on the bed. And I'm trying to push and nothing is happening. Like, I can't even feel my vagina. That is how bad it was. I always imagined that giving birth to a premature baby would be easier than a full-term baby because they are obviously smaller, but at least for this one, it was easier in some ways, in the sense that she was not as hard to get out as in fitting her out, but to actually get her out as in pushing, that was something that I've never experienced before. So I'm trying to push, literally nothing is happening. Like, I know that she's descended, but she is nowhere near coming out soon. I am pushing and pushing and there is no feeling down there of her moving. Mentally I'm pushing, but nothing was happening in my body. Like, the two were not connected. Nothing was happening. And then her heart rate starts slowly dropping. My contractions are still there, but the contractions are starting to slow down as well. And eventually the doctors say, Marissa, you need to push with all your might and get this baby out. She is either going to die or you are going to have an emergency C-section very soon. It's actually a miracle that I did not have a C-section earlier. I had been contracting for days, but baby's heart rate was strong. It was only at the peak of the contractions that it was slowing down, and because she was descending at this point, I had been trying to push her out for like 2 hours, so the doctors are getting a bit worried at this point, and that is all it took. Alex comes down next to me and he's like, baby, you need to push. And so the doctors tell me to like grab, I'm trying to show you but you can't even see, they're telling me to like hook my arms around my knees, pull my knees up into my chest and push with everything I got. Pushing, using my breath like I would if I was pushing in a normal labor. Probably 5 minutes of me just pushing mentally. Eventually it works. Eventually I can feel her slowly start to come down. And if you know that transition feeling, you know what I'm talking about. She finally starts moving. I didn't actually start dilating until like 8 p.m. that night. That's not actually when they consider you to be in active labor. So it isn't until you are 5 centimeters dilated that they consider that active labor. My active labor for this baby would have been an hour, if that, maybe even shorter, because that's how they determine it. However, in my mind, I was in labor for like 2.5 days. I finally get her out. They immediately grab this like plastic wrap and wrap it around her body to keep her body heat in. She was actually a lot bigger than I imagined her to be. I was thinking this like tiny fetus, like the size of my hand. She was pretty decent size. She was born 1.5 kilo. Her skin was very deep red. She cries, which I was very happy about. They did warn me beforehand that a lot of the times babies will come out and they're fine, but pretty quickly they deteriorate, as in like things start shutting down. They did do delayed cord clamping for 1 minute. Apparently 80% of the blood from the placenta does already go into them within the first minute, so that is what they did. Then Alex got to cut the cord. I will try and insert pictures here as well. He cut the cord and they rushed her off, and Alex went with them. They whisk her away and she is crying, but eventually she stops. I would estimate within the first 3 minutes she stops crying. Her chest starts collapsing because her lungs are not working, so her muscles are taking over and they're trying to do the work for her. So Alex is watching the whole thing. Clearly it was very, very hard for him to see. I am really glad that I did not see that, but it really upsets me that Alex had to go through that himself. Also, she stops crying because she's not getting any air and therefore she can't breathe. So they're trying to put the mask on her to get her breathing again and help with the oxygen levels. And then at this point, she starts spurting up blood out of her mouth. We found out that as I was in labor, I also started getting placental abruption. So my placenta started coming off my wall, my uterus wall, as I was in labor, which also is not good. So all of that blood that started pooling in my womb, the baby was swallowing it all. So when she comes out, her entire body is actually filled with the placenta's blood. So she's choking all of that up, and that explains why her body was all purple, because it was just full of blood. She starts choking it up and gagging on it. There are nurses everywhere. Obviously it's just a stressful situation. Alex gets really upset and they whisk her away. Meanwhile, I am inside of the room and I asked them to let me give birth to the placenta naturally. So I am lying there probably for about 20-30 minutes, and then I realized I should be with my baby. I want to go see her because I was really fine. I was just really tired, and I realized, give me the injection to give birth to the placenta quicker so I can go check on my baby and my husband. So they give me the shot in the leg, and let me tell you, this was way worse than giving birth to little Anna. Like pretty much immediately, all I feel is pain, and it's like a contraction, but it's a constant contraction. And it was just sharp stabbing pains everywhere in my tummy that would not stop. There was no break. It was so painful. I am lying there in bed like, I don't know what to do to stop the pain. Everyone is talking to me. Like, I have all these doctors and nurses coming in trying to explain to me what's happening to the baby, where Alex is. I cannot hear anyone. I'm there nodding my head, but inside I'm screaming because of how much pain I was in from that injection. Here's my theory. Because I gave birth to the baby early, 10 weeks earlier than I was meant to, and because the injection, I assume, is the same amount that they would give a woman who has a full-term baby, I think that the dose was too much for me, especially in my exhausted state. It was trying to force the placenta off my walls at a rate that was a lot faster than if I was to get the injection at full term. Does that make sense? It's really hard for me to explain this. Eventually it did come out, but that really rocked me. Like, that was something that, yeah, like I said, it was worse than labor. They did find that my membranes were all mushy because of the placental abruption. After they whisked the baby away, I would assume within 5 to 10 minutes, Alex did come back into the hospital room with me. After I had eaten something, I did go and visit the baby, so did Alex, but Alex wasn't actually allowed to stay with me at hospital. I can't remember why. I think the rooms, they just didn't allow people to stay there, which is, I find very strange. Like, you would think they would support partners being together after such a traumatic experience. So Alex did end up driving home to the kids on the Gold Coast. He was very shook. I remember I at that point had calmed down a bit, and because I had not seen what Alex had witnessed with baby, I was okay. But I know that Alex was very shaken, and he stayed that way for a few days. It was really sad. I'm not too sure how much I will share about the specifics with baby Anna and her issues and how all of that is going. But yeah, that was basically my birth story. Very dramatic, very traumatic. but I can let you guys know she is now 2 weeks old today, and she is doing amazing. She is incredible. She's a superstar. She's amazing. We did end up calling her Anna because Anna means mountain of strength in Hebrew. Most of our kids are either named Greek or Hebrew names, and we find that in the Bible, God and Jesus would rename people based on their purpose in life, and so that is just what we have taken in regards to naming our children. We try to place meaning on our kids' names based on what and who we want them to be. That's why we named her Anna, and I just thought Leia went really well with her name. She is doing great. I am doing great, if you guys are wondering. Subscribe if you want to stay up to date with everything. I will make another video updating you guys on everything that has happened since Anna has been born. I will be making more motherhood videos as we transition. She is still in hospital. I am with my kids down on the Gold Coast now, so I am traveling to see Anna each day. She's an hour away in hospital, but I will keep you guys updated on everything. Thank you so much for making it to the end. If you are still watching this, like the video, subscribe, let me know in the comments any thoughts you have, any questions you have around pregnancy or labor or motherhood in general. I always respond to all my comments, and with that I will see you guys in my next one. Bye.